are, how we interact with one. So agency is me presenting myself to the world. So if one sees themselves as a doer of mathematics, then they engage in behaviors that are associated being a doer of mathematics. So I want to keep these three constructs in mind as we move forward. And so this is a big question I always ask. If we accept that participation is risk-taking, how do we create structures such that students are willing to take risk? And I think we have to really think about that. So we have to have socially and emotionally safe environments that students are willing to take risk in order to be participatory, and then we position them as being competent because they're participatory. And so there's a risk-taking factor, there's a positioning factor, and there's a competency factor that are interplay as we think about students in their experiences in math classrooms. So I wanted to kind of tell you about some work I've done over, it's been the last 16 years. I've been following a group of 8 boys I started with 8 boys, and now I'm down to 6. But for the most part, I followed most of these boys all 8 of these boys for at least 10 years. But for the last 16 years, and what I've done is I've interviewed these boys, their students, their parents. I've reviewed their record. I did observations in their classrooms. I have them write their mathematical autobiographies, just kind of collecting data, trying to see how these boys transition from. So initially, this was my dissertation work, and I continued my dissertation work on through for many of these boys who have graduated from high school and have graduated from college, and then there were a few who didn't go to college. All of them did graduate from high school. And so I just so this table is hard to see, but I want to, if you can see the characteristics here. So in terms of when these boys were middle schoolers. So I'm gonna focus on these boys as middle schoolers and not as adults right now. And so when I first interacted with these boys, I just kind of created this table of how they see themselves. So you can see strong, on the characteristics, you see strong academic identity, likes math, religious identity, co-curricular identity. So we can see this kind of multiple identities that come into play, and that how these multiple identities might be mediated by the environments in which they are participatory. Athletics identity, and then positive preschool experiences, AG placement, and then AG meaning academically gifted. And there's a story behind these boys being identified as being academically gifted, not recognized as academically gifted, and then their parents discussing race as a factor in their experiences in middle grades, and then parents as guardians of opportunity. When you look at the 8 boys, there are 2 of them that look very different from the others, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But I am going to discuss Bilal, who is not the last one, but the next to last, as I read across. Really dig deeper into Bilal, because Bilal, when you look at Bilal, I mean, he has all of the kind of markings ticked off, so to speak. But Darren and Andre are a little bit different from the other boys, but they were identified as being successful. And the way I defined success in this study was based on course enrollment patterns. And so when I was introduced to these boys, all of these boys were in, at the time, a high-level mathematics, and in this context, they all were enrolled in Algebra 1 as a 7th or 8th grader, or geometry as a 7th or 8th grader. So all these boys were, I know the context has shifted a little bit in terms of identifying what's a high-level math course in middle school, but all these boys were in Algebra 1 or geometry in middle school. So here's Andre. Here's Andre, one of the boys that is different on that table. He says, I want to go to the Air Force Academy and become a pilot. You have to be good at math to get into the academy. So in Andre's context, you can see in this statement that he has this kind of futuristic, forward-looking identity, because he knows he wants to go to the Air Force Academy in middle school. He knows he wants to be a pilot, and he knows that there are behaviors that he has to engage in order to getting to the academy. So he sees he has this identity around this in order to move forward to this. And so this means that he has to then engage in behaviors that are associated to his goal-seeking idea. And so let me say this about Andre. What makes Andre a little bit different from the other boys is that Andre lived with his older brother at the time. He didn't live with his parents. Andre really was a kid who was alone, but performed well academically. You're talking about resiliency. This is a kid who's highly resilient, who didn't necessarily have all the supports at home necessary, but highly resilient. So here's Clayton. Clayton, again, here's his identity, affirming his identity. I like being with smart kids. So in terms of his enrollment pattern, I like being with smart kids because that means I'm one of the smartest. Since I answer all the questions of math, that means I'm the smartest of the smart kids. And based on this, even in this statement, we see this identity of smartness and how he defines smartness, but you see this kind of behavior that's engaged in that. And so I'm going to argue that, how do we as teachers help students develop identities as doers of mathematics so that they then can know what are the associated behaviors with this identity? And so these identity and agency, and so these associated behaviors is the agency that's related to related to their identities. And so these things are not mutually exclusive. And then here's Bilal. Bilal says, I got to excel in everything I do, be the best that I can be. Being the best means doing your work, asking questions, being involved in clients. Again, agency there, engaging behaviors. And Andre, again, as I mentioned earlier, good math students are focused, do their work, want to make A's all the time. I'm a good math student. He sees himself as a good math student, so he engages in behaviors that are associated with being a good math student. I argue that teachers are identity builders. And so here's Darren's teacher, Mrs. Belaine. She said, Darren says, my teacher, Mrs. Belaine, cared about all of us. She would bend over backwards to help us when we needed. She really helped me. She talked to me and told me that I had a lot of potential in math and that I should use it to get ahead in life. I was capable of doing a lot in math. That's what really motivated me. She understands that there's a lot of pressure put on African-American males. She let me know I can be cool and smart at the same time. So like Andre, Darren is the other kid that's different from the other boys in the list. And like Andre, Darren has, if one wanted to describe, not much support at home. Darren was a foster child who moved from place to place to place. But Darren still excelled academically. He attributed his teachers, making sure that he got what he needed and needed to get what done for him to move forward. And his identity was highly connected to it. So Darren, even throughout my interaction with Darren lived in multiple places and still had an identity to excel academically, even in the circumstances in which he was placed or lived in. And Jabari and Darren had the same teacher. So this is what Jabari says about Mrs. Belaine. I don't know how she does it, but sometimes she knows what we're going to say, what we're going to do and say before we do and say anything. She knows us so well that she gets us out of trouble before we get in trouble. In math, she knows the right thing to say to help us with our work. And so this idea of teachers being identity builders and creating structures for, in this case, for these two boys to navigate their identities and the space to help them, but giving them the space to navigate identity, but not to move into spaces that might impact their identities negatively. So I want to tell you Bilal's story. And let me just tell you Bilal's story real quickly. And I'm going to read this real fast. So here's Bilal. So Bilal's in sixth grade, and I'm just going to paraphrase a lot of this rather than reading it. But I published a story in 2008 in the Journal for Research in Math Education. Bilal is a sixth grade Black boy who considered himself to be smart with a little swagger. He attends school in an urban school division located in the southeastern state. As an elementary student, Bilal earned the highest level of achievement on the third, fourth, fifth grade state standardized mathematics test. On all objective measures of mathematics, Bilal had performed well and in most cases excelled. In addition, he has earned good grades in mathematics by earning primarily A's with an occasionally B. Bilal stated that that mathematics is his favorite subject and that math comes to him naturally and easy. He loves challenging math problems and math puzzles. Bilal's mother acknowledged that her son is a busybody and is in need of variety and stimulation in order to prevent boredom. She also stated that Bilal needs to feel that his teachers are interested and cares for him in order for him to be productive in class. Both Bilal and his mother admit that he can be a handful in class. Occasionally he speaks out and is not in his seat at appropriate time. His behavior is not always that of a model student. However, they believe his behavior is well within the acceptable classroom norms. At the end of fifth grade, Bilal was excited about going to middle school. At the time, teachers identified students to take a math placement test to gain entry into an upper-level pre-algebra mathematics course for sixth graders. Bilal was upset that he was not selected and that there were students selected to take the test who he considered was not as good at math as he was. Bilal's mother inquired about the criteria for taking the placement test and discovered that Bilal met all criteria except one, teacher recommendation. Bilal's fifth grade teacher indicated that although Bilal scored well on the assessment, his behavior and his inability to sit still would not make him a good candidate for a pre-algebra course. In a conference with the sixth grade guidance counselor, Bilal's mother inquired about placement in the algebra course. The guidance counselor responded that she would not want to place Bilal in a class that he would not do well. But Bilal's mother felt that the counselor did not consider Bilal's previous mathematics performance and focused on other things. The middle school principal evaluated Bilal's situation and argued that pre-algebra is a rigorous course for sixth graders and only disciplined students are capable of passing the course. Even though Bilal has performed well throughout his schooling, performed well in mathematics throughout his schooling, school personnel focused their attention on his behavior rather than his academics when evaluating his potential. When sixth grade school year began, the mathematics class had no Black male students. Bilal School District is concerned about the achievement gap. And in fact, the school division has a goal statement focused on the achievement gap, stating it seeks to understand the causes of the gap in order to devise solutions to reverse it. Bilal's story raises questions about beliefs that school districts hold for Black boys. Fortunately, Bilal had a persistent mother who advocated for her son, challenged the school division. Bilal gained entry into the pre-algebra class the second week of the school year. Unfortunately, Bilal's story is not unique. Black boys are often confronted with lower expectations, even when they have shown themselves capable of achieving. If school districts are serious about understanding the needs of all students, then they should critically assess possible structural and systemic factors that contribute to access issues that impact Black boys. So that's Bilal's story as a middle schooler. I just want to tell you the rest of his story, because his story is one that I find fascinating and very interesting. And I hope that you find it fascinating as well. And I'm mindful of the time, so I'm going to speed up just a little bit. So I'm going to tell you his story through grades. I'm not going to say anything else. I'm just going to listen to you. You can turn your mics on if you like. Please turn your mics on. I'm just going to listen to you. And I'm just going to show you his story through grades, but I think his grades tell a story. Certainly I can tell you his story through voice. I want to tell you his story through his grades, and then that way we can see his story. So here's Bilal in 7th and 8th grade. I mean, you can see that he's okay. I mean, got an occasional C here and there. I'm sorry about the formatting. I don't know what happens. Every time I open this PowerPoint, the formatting gets off. But you can see his grades in 7th and 8th grader. You know, he does well in math. He's done well. Here's Bilal's grade in 9th and 10th grade. In 9th grade, you see he does well. In 10th grade, he does well in math. But he has some other issues going on. You can see some shifts. I should say that Bilal, the reason why Bilal has so many courses, this question comes up quite often when I do this talk. Bilal was in a high school that was on a 4x4. And that's why he has 8 classes. I don't know if you're familiar with the 4x4 schedule, but if you're familiar with, they do 4 courses each semester, and they meet every day, and then 4 courses, for a different set of 4 courses the next semester meet every day. So that's Bilal in 10th grade. Any thoughts, reactions? No? Okay.
Feel free to unmute yourself this time. I've seen these before, Robert, and I didn't realize that it was a block schedule. So in 10th grade, I kind of my wondering is whether or not the D's were in the same semester and the A's were in the same semester. Just kind of.
That's a good question. I should have, I can't recall off the top of my head whether they're not, because, that would be an interesting story. Is the Algebra 2, Foreign Language, and ROTC in the same semester? And if they are, then there's this interesting story for the second semester of his 10th grade year. But here's Bilal as he taught. So this is his voice in his 10th grade year. For me in math, for everything I would say, they would expect me to fail. I think society has an expectation for me to fail in anything I do. So this is where I think the master narrative comes into play, where they begin to, where I think where boys see these narratives in popular press and in the news, and they begin to renegotiate their identities, and it might explain why some Black boys who've done well in elementary, middle grades, and sometimes we say it's about who they associate with. But also I think that we can't discount the fact that maybe it is a master narrative that's at play that's speaking into them so loudly. And so he said this, like, when I'm in my classes, so Bilal went to a high school. In middle school, all of these boys were, I wouldn't say all of them, because they went to different middle school. In Bilal's case, he was in a predominantly African-American middle school, Black middle school, and then he ended up at a high school where the Black student population was around less than 30%, somewhere around that. And then we look at kind of tracking that happened. So this is where this statement kind of might sit in terms of context. Like when I'm in my classes, especially in my honors classes and stuff like that, I was surrounded by all these white people doing well. And you would see Black people in the lower level classes not getting the same opportunities that I would get. So I can't say that I've experienced it firsthand, but I've seen it. So I asked him about race. So in this case, he says he hadn't experienced racism, but he sees it, which is interesting. I mean, he sees it that, he one of very few in his honors classes. He sees a lot of his Black peers in other classes, which is kind of an interesting context when you think about how he might see himself or see the context or understand the context in which he lives and has participated. So here he is in 11th and 12th grade.
Robert, Steve asked if there was a significant life incident that occurred to Bilal. His mic isn't working, so I said if anybody wants to.
Great question. So, without getting, I always say this, without putting too much of his business out on Front Street, significant, not at this time in his life. He did have a significant life incident later, but not at this time. You see that he's done well in math again, but you see these shifts going on. I mean, he's got A's. He's on the extremes, and I always like to talk about him being on the extremes because he has A's or D's with occasional C. I mean, he's not getting F's. He's in these extreme spaces, and I this is where in my interactions with him, how his identity is mediated from class to class. He is highly sensitive to who's in the class and who's teaching the class. And, you know, I'm going to say this, the line between researcher and mentor blurred as I interacted with these boys as we move forward. And I can say how I interacted with that context and say, you know, in life, you know, you're not going to be around people you like all the time. So you're going to have to figure out how to make this work.
Mm-hmm.
You just can't do well with folks with folks that you like, and not do well with folks that you perceive that you don't like. And so we had those conversations that, and still is a part of our. I talk with him regularly, at least once or twice a month, regularly, even as a younger adult, and as a father. He's a father now. And so here's Bilal. Said, I got it, man. I got to work things out. I'm smarter than all of those kids, but my head ain't right. Rob, what would you do if you were me? So now he's reaching out. He's negotiating. Now I am in trouble. I'm struggling here. What would you do if you were me? So I would say in Bilal's case, when I say the lines between researcher and mentor are blur, I do wonder how his life would be different if the bus is outside. Please come now. I remarked 6th grade. So here's Bilal in his first year of college. So you can see there's an interesting story here. I mean, it seems like he does well in transition years. He did well in college, his first year, compared to how he performed through his latter years of high school, because he earned all A's and did really well. So here's what Bilal says. It is the fact that it's those people friends versus me. So now he's negotiating his identity here. It is just those people I see in classes, and I don't even know their names. How do you sort of break into that? It's difficult. I don't know. It's hard because my community is their community, and yeah, that just makes it more difficult. I should tell you that Bilal went to a Southern college. One might describe that college as the PWI, predominantly white institution, where there weren't many black students. So he also goes on to say, it just makes me want to be a loner. Mm-hmm. And in these classes, you can't be a loner. Conversations about math opens up your mind to think a little more. I guess my feeling and their feeling towards each other. We don't really know how to read each other. So he's trying to negotiate, how do I get in with this? How do I get in with these other folks whom we come from different communities, and he's still trying to negotiate this space. So here's Bilal's second year college. Mm-hmm. He didn't do well second year college.
Wow.
I will say this. So you can see he's an engineering major. So in his engineering classes, where you see an F for the lab, it didn't count against his GPA. And I can remember very vividly talking with him about these labs. He's like, well, don't count against your GPA. I'm not going to waste my time going. So he didn't. Which is like, I think it's him negotiating between, a lot of things going on there. But yeah, he just, these were his first Fs in school. You can also see in the summer where he took an English class and a math class and did well. So he says, I think my whole academic experience here at Blank College has to do with my confidence level. So with math, going into it, I was really confident. Freshman year, I was still confident. I think I got an A-. People joked me because I got an A-, but I had already had the class. And I was like, I got an A. Still, regardless, confident. I was confident going into things. Then he said, then linear was a really hard class. And I think that lowered my confidence. I still got a C somehow. but I think that lowered my concept of where I saw myself among other students. And I think that affected how well I do. I accepted that as my norm. I think I got a C, actually. After that, if I got a C, I was completely fine with that. And so this is where he renegotiated, because up until that point, he only got A's in math, but then he got C's afterwards, well, in his sophomore year in math. And so this is where he really renegotiated his identity as a doer of mathematics. Third year, all A's. And I'm just going to speed this up because I'm speeding this up. So here's third year, straight A's. And he said, here's his agency. So what happened after his third year, he pledged a fraternity. He got tired. He started to go to the professor's office. He learned from being a part of this fraternity some behaviors that he needed to engage in, going to the professor's office, seeing the GA, learning from folks who he should and shouldn't take, and all of those things. So he developed a sense of agency of what he has to do. And then he was thinking about changing his major. Here's his fourth year. He got all A's again. He changes his major to education. But then in his fifth year, he realized that he was only a few courses short of completing his degree in engineering. So from his third year through his fifth year, he earned straight A's, and he graduated with a double major in civil engineering and in education. So this is him after his fifth year. Funny thing, I studied less to make better grades. I'm graduating with a double major in engineering and education. It took me 5 years, but we ain't gonna talk about that. So it's this idea of him taking a little bit longer. So this makes me think about his interwoven identities. How do we affirm students' identity? How do we help students demonstrate their high and low sense of agency and how that comes into play? And so this helps me think about what can we do in classrooms right now. I think what we can do, and the work I've done in the summer, is how do we then create tasks that are grounded in social interactions? How do we connect students to one another? How do we connect students to mathematics? And I think if we can think of ways to help students develop these connections, I think we help develop this sense of identity. And then the associated behaviors, we model that and support students with that. And so these are my boys from the summer and the work that they do. And I kind of want to throw these in as I move forward. One of the things that we do with the MQ program is that I always tell my boys, we try to recognize their brilliance. And not only do we recognize their brilliance, but they recognize each other's brilliance. So one of the things I ask them when we greet each other, when they greet me, even to this day, I ask them, how you doing? And they would say, I'm truly wonderful and getting better. And then I ask them, what makes you truly wonderful? They tell me what makes them truly wonderful. Then I ask them, so what are you going to do to get better? So it opens up that space where they are talking about their own brilliance, but then how are they going to grow from that? And so I'm purposeful in thinking about them forward thinking and connecting, getting better with their identity, and also thinking about what makes them truly wonderful. This is just some tasks where we've engaged in notice and wonder types of tasks, taking risk, presenting their work in class. And so I want to present this frame because I do think there's some things that we can do in classroom. Is to how to, particularly if you want to think about what do we do on Monday, so to speak. I think we have to think about what are some opportunities where we have tasks where students are at an impasse, where they have to engage in decision making, where the task has multiple entry points. And once students are in this space, then what are some of the things that we can do in our practices that creates discourse, ask questions? I think notice and wondering is one of those things. And so, because all kids can notice and all kids can wonder. So that positions the students as being participatory. If we think about mathematical competence as being participatory, then we have to think about ways that we can get them to be participatory in classroom. Rough draft talk, I don't have enough time to talk about that in great detail, but Mandy Jansen talks about that in her work. It reduces status, it increases the space for being participatory. I actually have my boys engage in two drafts, one sheet, and let me go back up a little bit. So here's an example of in the middle where two students' work is on the same sheet, and then they negotiate their work among one another. And so again, participatory. And then, questioning reading. I think, and then question that might promote reading. So if we think about these tasks, how do we position students as participatory? I think we reduce the perception of risk taking. We position them as being competent. We affirm their identities. And I'm skipping just a little bit because I am way over. So this is one statement I use all the time. And I think it's important that we have to know students' stories. When we know their stories, we know their motivations. And when we know their motivations, we recognize their brilliance. And so one of the things I think we can do is begin to know who they are and whom they are. And then how can we use that as motivation to recognize their brilliance. I am sorry I went way over, so I'll stop there.
No, thank you so much for that. If you stop sharing your screen, then we can see everybody at once. So I don't know if we can, then we can kind of see if people have questions. So I shouldn't take the first question. Does anybody have a question? Because I'll ask lots of questions.
Hey, I see Reggie. I see Reggie out there. Hey, Reggie.
And Reggie, you started to make a comment that I didn't see in time to make it. Do you still want to make some?
Well, I guess I just kind of noticed, just with my own experiences, I was Bilal. So I think one of the biggest things that I noticed and what I would argue is that he became aware his freshman year in high school, more aware of the game and how things were working more around him. And I think those things were starting to influence, like Dr. Berry said, his identity. Not that I don't think that I don't know. I mean, it's all my opinion at this point, but I know for me, I know that when you start questioning your identity, you start questioning your ability. And then you start to devalue your ability because your ability is not given that same level of value as your peers. And I say that because I grew up military in situations where I often was the only black male in most of my classes when I got to high school. And I started to adjust down a little bit just because I also had friends, it wasn't cool to have A's. It wasn't really cool to have A's. And even when I did have the A's, I started to feel, for lack of better words, kind of like an Uncle Tom, which is really not good for a young man when you think about it to view themselves in that way. But I think, and I don't know for sure, but that's something I noticed immediately. Like he went from freshman year, sophomore year, and then it was like almost as if he had become aware of some things that he wasn't necessarily paying as much attention to. But I don't know, like, again, I don't know Bilal personally, and I'm sure Dr. Berry can expand upon that more. I just know with my personal situation, yes, it started to affect kind of, my ability did not change. My confidence did.
So, yeah, I would say that Bilal, I would argue, similarly, his ability didn't change, but I do think he negotiated his space changed. When I say that, when he was in middle school, it was a little bit smaller. The context changed. High school, first year he did well, but I think after his freshman year, where he began to, when I asked him questions about the context of the school, he began to recognize some inequities and started to question the inequities and things of that sort. Mm-hmm. His peer grouping didn't change, though. I'm pretty confident about that because Bilal, he still hung out with his boys, although his boys weren't in the same class as him. I just think he began to negotiate differently, and he always knew that he can recover, and he always found a way to recover. even in college when he recovered. So, Bilal's currently a middle school teacher. Well, no, he was a middle school teacher last year. He's no longer a middle school teacher. He graduated with a degree, with 2 degrees, with 2 majors, and then now he has a master's degree. But he's no longer a teacher, and he was a phenomenal teacher. He now works for a research and development firm, because he has a background in civil engineering, and so he recognizes his need for being in the education space. But he's married with a family, and he made decisions that probably was best for him, in terms of what he had to do to economically support his family, and the opportunity came forward for him to do that. So I'm always pushing him back, man, we need you here. But I understand that his family needs him, and I support that he made probably the best decision that for himself and his family, for his wife and his child.
Well, I think the comment that was interesting was when you said that when you referred to the teacher when he was in middle school that made it so it was okay to be cool and smart. And Rainu, I see that you made the comment of what isn't cool to have A's, and the idea of what can we do as teachers to encourage the students that being smart is the cool thing to do.
It's the cool thing to do.
That climate and culture, right, of establishing that climate and culture in your classroom, but also in the whole school, right, that needs to really be established very intentionally.
Yeah, there are these public things that happen in school that are interesting to me. So now I don't want to get on a soapbox, but
it's okay.
But that I think that we really have to think about in terms of who gets celebrated for what and how they are celebrated. And
everybody's nodding.
And so I think we have to really think about that and how it, certainly there's some positive implications for that, but there are some consequences that are associated with that as well. And oftentimes we don't think about the consequences that comes with that because we're focused on the celebrations part of that.
Does anybody else have any questions? I know it is 4:31, so those of you, that's okay. I enjoyed listening to it. I hope other people did as well. If people need to log off, I understand. Dr. Ware, do you have another 5 or 10 minutes if people have other?
Yeah, 5 minutes is fine. Yeah,
okay.
2 minutes is fine.
Go ahead.
So a lot of the students, Bilal, you were talking about, he already had this great math identity. I'm a middle school, high school math teacher. What do I do when a student comes to me and they don't have that identity? They already view themselves as very poor in math. How do I change that narrative? I encourage, I do those things. I try and get them to participate, push them to, you don't have to be the absolute best, but you can still be a good math student. But how do I change that narrative when they view themselves poorly?
So, interestingly, so some of the boys I work with in MQ, one of the things I try to do is create a social structure for them to engage in mathematics. And one of those things I do is notice and wonder. I wish I could share a task that I do, and I've given a talk on this many times, where I present a picture. They notice and wonder about it because all kids can notice and wonder. And then, but there's some mathematics behind it. And so I capture them when they notice all the things in the picture and they wonder about things that are in the picture. And oftentimes their wonders are questions. And then as we move forward, their wonders become more mathematical questions. And then we say, okay, well, let's do the math. Or I might have the math question that goes with the notice and wondering, and then we engage in the mathematics. And so they've already participated because they've noticed, and that's the social part of it. And then they wonder, there's still a social part of it. And now I'm going to capture them with the math, because I'm going to ask them some math. So one of the tasks that's come to my mind right now, with the boys I've done in the summer, was I showed them the screen of an iPhone, and I think some of you may have heard me talk about this before, where they've noticed all these things about the iPhone. And they write down all the notices about the iPhone. But the iPhone, when I showed them the first screen, the iPhone's at 5%. And then I asked them to wonder, and they asked all these questions, why is this person's phone at 5%, and all these other questions. And they noticed all the other things. Why is the person's phone on the alarm set and all those things? But then I showed them a series of pictures where the phone is charged up to a certain percentage point. And then the math behind it, at what point would the phone be fully charged? Now they notice and wonder. So I'm not focusing on, we're going to get to rightness and wrongness, but that's not the focus of it. The focus is on now developing the mathematics to think about, is this a linear process? Is it a non-linear process? What's going on here? Those kinds of things. And that way I can bring in the mathematics. I mean, with younger kids, I've shown them a picture of a section of a field of grass. And so they notice and wonder, and they say all these things about grass. But then I ask them, but then some of them, well, in one case, the kids ask, well, how many blades of grass are there? So we can count them all, can't we? But then, well, there's got to be another way you can do it without counting them all. Well, let's figure that out. How can we do that? So this now gets us into the idea of sampling and all of those kinds of things. And this is where so the socialization, the social aspects of it, and then bringing the math that comes with that, creates an opportunity because they participated socially. Now, I think I grabbed them and got them socially. Now the math then becomes important to them because now they have a question to now want to explore. So that's just one way. I mean, I'm sure there are other folks who are more expert at me than I about thinking about it. But I also engage in rough draft talk. And Mandy Jansen is great for this if you want to look up her work. Amanda Jansen, she's at the University of Delaware. So rough draft talk, where we engage in a task, and the kids have engaged in the task, and I ask them, and I use the term rough draft talk. And the reason why I use the term rough draft talk, because just like a rough draft paper, it is your thinking under construction. You can change your ideas, and they talk with one another. And so it's under construction. So as you engage with your partner or your group, you are in the rough draft. So they've already engaged in the mathematics, but now they're in the rough draft, so they can go back and change whatever they want to, this and that and the other, and things of that sort. And somehow in some cases, they collaboratively work together to come up with a final draft. Again, to me, this is the idea of bringing socialization. How we connect students to student, and then connect students to the mathematics with that. So it's intentionally tagged as rough draft. Now status is reduced because everybody's thinking has been put on the table. Everybody's thinking been put on the table. Even in some cases where the student who hasn't written much, but has thought about it, so in some cases, you might not have written a lot down yet, but I know you thought about it. Tell me just what are you thinking? Well, and because in some cases, I've had boys who had this apprehension about, they're just not unsure if their thinking is valuable. And that's one thing I try to lower the stakes. Your thinking is valuable in this space. And so once we get them going, it will take a couple iterations to get them going. But once they engage in rough draft talk, even if it's not a practice I'm using, I found, and even with teachers whose classroom I work with in my local area, I've seen students where they say, can we just stop? And I want to do some rough draft thinking. That is a concept I never introduced to kids, but it's something that they've come up with. Rough draft thinking. And so when they do the rough draft thinking, and then they engage in rough draft talk, and then they kind of move forward. So that socialization comes into play. So any way that I think that you can bring socialization that connects students to students, and then move that connection between students to mathematics, I think opens up the opportunity for students being efficacious about their abilities to do mathematics.
Good.
Hey, Chris. I see you there, Chris.
This isn't so much a question as it is like a comment, which is, I thought when Reggie was sharing and what you were sharing about Bilaw's story, it's really interesting being like an Asian American, which might be on the opposite spectrum of identity, where it's assumed you are very competent in that. And when you get to college, I don't know, depending on what school you went to, there's kind of this stereotype that, all Asians hang out together, or all the Asian kids will like sit together, kind of a thing, which is kind of true, because when it's exactly like what you're saying. Like, I never really had a relationship with my college advisor, but I had a relationship with all of the senior Korean Americans at my school who would tell me like, do this, do that. And so those networks are really what it was like. There was a rule book that I didn't know existed, so they kind of like schooled me into all of that, and that's what got me by.
Yeah, I think those networks are important. I mean, for collegiate students, I mean, I've been gotten in research with our College of Engineering, because our College of Engineering has not been successful with graduating students of color. And it is the networks that comes into play. I mean, it's interesting, Chris, that you mentioned, Asian students sitting together. When you said that, one of the first things I thought about, I don't know if you're familiar with the book, Beverly Daniel Tatum's book, Why Do All Black Kids Sit Together in the Cafeteria? If you're not familiar, it's the 25th anniversary edition that just came out. I would highly recommend reading Beverly Daniel Tatum's book, Why Do All the Black Kids Sit Together in the Cafeteria? It's a really fascinating, interesting read. Yeah.
Great. Do we have one more? I think we're totally out of time. We're way over. So I'm going to thank everybody. If anybody has ideas, I did put a lot of the things that you guys talked about in the chat window. The chat window doesn't save even on a recording. So I put those in the forum, so that if anybody wants to continue that conversation, they can continue them there. But I did post them in it. Renu just asked Robert if we could have access to the presentation. We can post it with the video. We could have a PDF version. And we'll post that. The recording did not start at the beginning. So if you show anybody the recording, it starts partway through. So our apologies for that.
That's all on me. I
That's
apologize.
So one other thing today for NCTM and tomorrow is Ask Robert Anything Day. So if you go on the NCTM website, you can ask Robert anything. Anything is kind of big. I mean,
I just posted
I've been answering questions all day on NCTM's my NCTM website. Ask Robert Anything. It's the first time that NCTM has ever done this. It's the first time I've done something like this, which is kind of frightening because I'm having to be tied to my computer just in case a question comes up. So today's Ask Robert Anything.
I put a link to it. I don't know if it works because it's got a really long thing, but I did put a link to it if you have questions for Robert that you want to go through the ICTM blog. It did work? Renu said it did work. Okay, so you can click on that there. And then I put a link to our page so that you can see, like I said, I copied as many of the comments that people made that had resources and things. I put them in the forum. So I put a link to the forum at the bottom of the page if you want to be able to kind of see. I don't think I copied all of them. I copied the ones that seem to have resources in them. So if you want to see them, they're there. Please let us know if there's other discussions you'd like to have, or if you'd like to help us lead any of these discussions. Please let us know. So next week we are talking about technology, and we are having Casio ClassPad.net. If you haven't already looked at it, check it out, because Mike Reiners is going to come talk about it, and then Lise Ward is going to come talk about NCTM's Illuminations, and just kind of looking at the resources. So shout out to NCTM again, Robert. There you go.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff there.
If we can all just say thank you one last time. I loved hearing it. Even though I heard it before, I still learned more. So thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, thanks.